A significant thing, and I'm thanking God for it. It's been a wonderful morning. One of the measures I think of what a church should be is having everyone participate as much as they can. And boy, haven't we had a wonderful morning of the highs and the lows, of people coming up. And I love the KYB, thank you. I've only got a black jelly bean left, so if you want a black jelly bean, come and see me later. But that is sin, so I wouldn't grab that one too quickly. We as a church are looking for a kingdom impact, this in 2023. We spoke about how the story started in the book of Acts is not yet complete, that the Spirit of God is still working in us in 2023 and we want to be a part of it. And you might remember this vision about being God's people carrying God's presence and God's authority into God's world. It is all about the Spirit of God and what we are called to do. We talked about our intimacy, that we're going to have impact in these 4 areas, one of 4 areas, or actually all 4 areas, our intimacy with Jesus. How has your intimacy with Jesus grown in 2023? Because if it hasn't, you've missed something. We're almost halfway through a year, and if your intimacy with Jesus hasn't grown, something's stunted there, and you really need to think through what it is. We want to see this vision seen in our family and friends, our community and marketplace, and Trudy spoke about that, about the picture on her desk. In our spiritual home, we want to love, pray, give and serve. And every term I've been sort of focusing on one of these. We've spent a couple of weeks focusing, and today we're going to be talking about giving. And giving is one of those money talks, and no pastor likes giving the money talk. And that's why I've got Mark Fleming coming next week to follow me up. And we're going to be looking at 2 Corinthians chapter 8 today. But I don't know if you realise this, but every Sunday morning before I come to church, I always go to the Sydney Morning Herald page because I want to discover if World War III started or there's been some sort of catastrophe. I want to know that before I come and stand here before you guys. So a couple of weeks ago, I checked the Sydney Morning Herald and I get this on my phone. 1/4 of Australians, of Aussies, haven't donated to charity in the last year. 1/4 of Australians have not given anything to anyone outside themselves in the last year. And the justification of that is the one above that, isn't it? The sharp rise in the hip pocket concerns of the anniversary of the Albanese government comes with economists, blah, 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 blah. We've always got a good excuse why we don't want to be generous. And today, I want to ask you, does that disturb you? That 1/4 of the people, 1 in 4, I don't know what percentage here, but 1 in 4 people have not given anything to charity. I was trying to think about what's the barriers to giving. Fear. Fear that actually, if I don't store up all my treasures now, I don't know what I'm going to get tomorrow. There's going to be a failure to care. People just don't care. That if someone over there is doing it tough, they've made their bed, let them lay in it. Priorities. We love to get the bigger house, and we love all the extra cars, and we need all the streaming services. And when we look at what we've got left, we've got nothing to give, so how can we give? The world tells us to live the lifestyle you can afford. Actually, it doesn't, does it? It says, live the lifestyle that you want. And if you can't afford it, borrow more money. I think one of the problems is in our society today is gambling. I watched the A-League Grand Final last night, inundated by gambling ads. I want to say today, if you have a problem with gambling, and I know there's people here who have, I don't know who you are, but with this number there has to be, can I just ask you to go and get help? I really encourage you to get help with the gambling. And if you don't have a trouble with gambling and you are gambling, can I encourage you, stop it? I've seen too much damage with gambling, and because you gamble a little bit maybe, but the winnings come from people who can't afford it. It comes from children whose parents give you that money in their win because that's what they lose, and there's children going to bed tonight because without food, if they got a bed, if they got a house. And if you don't have trouble gambling and you can't stop it, you've got a problem with gambling, and so get help. Gambling is such a poison in our culture. Let me encourage you. I'm not talking about the raffle at the football club to get shirts for the kids, I'm talking about the lottos. I know you think you're going to give money to God and all those. It's not justification. There is no justification. I've been in some cultures when you go cross-culturally and where you see this remarkable generosity of people who have got nothing. I went to Vietnam many years ago to baptise someone, and I was warned, when you go into the families and have meals with the families, make sure you don't eat too much, because they'll give you all the food that they've got, and you'll go away as big, nice and full, and it's been a wonderful meal, but they've been quietly not eating anything so that you can eat. The generosity of people in poverty sometimes should shame us that we can't give in our richness. What stops us being more generous? 2 Corinthians 8 is a story of encouragement to be generous. 2 Corinthians 8 verse 1, Paul writes, "And now, brothers and sisters, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches in the midst of the very severe trial. Their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty wells up in rich generosity. For I testify they gave as much as they were able and even beyond their ability. Entirely on their own, they urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the Lord's people. And they exceeded our expectations. They gave themselves first of all to the Lord, and then by the will of God also to us. And so we urge Titus, just as he had earlier made a beginning, to bring also to completion this act of grace in your part. But since you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in complete earnestness and in love, we've kindled in you, see that you excel in this grace of giving." You see, what was happening was there was this huge famine in the Roman world at that time. And this guy named Agabus, who come from Jerusalem up to Antioch, had predicted, he's a prophet, and he said there's going to be this huge famine. And indeed, there was a huge famine in 45 AD to 63, where people starved to death. And so Paul went to the churches where he saw that from the Gentiles and said, we need to raise a support, we need to give to these Christians because Christians were suffering even in a greater way in Jerusalem. Do you know why? Because you become a Christian and sometimes people were excluded from the support of families. I've known of this in places like Ghana, where if there's an Islamic family, they live in a compound, they share the same food, they share the same shelter. You become a Christian, you're excluded from the food, the common food of the family. You're excluded from the compound, and so where does a believer go? They have to go and be supported by other believers. Extreme poverty. But there's a word here in verse 4 it talks about, and for us it's such a simple word. It's one you've been taught when you're probably a 2-year-old. It's all about sharing. And sharing, this word in the original language was a really special word. It's koinonia. Now what koinonia is about is, you can almost hear it in the word, it's about community. It's about sharing what we have with each other. What it means is we're actually not going to let anyone go without. And if talk about membership before, if church membership means anything, it means that we're not going to let anyone go without food, go without shelter, not amongst the people of God, because we have a culture of koinonia, of sharing, of generosity. That's just who we are. But Paul says to giving themselves to the Lord and to us. He talks about giving themselves to the Lord and to us, because you can't give yourself to God without giving yourself to each other, who are the people of God. We can't give money to God. God doesn't have a bank account up there that he thinks, oh great, I've got your $10 this week. It's all about the people. The money is always about ministering and serving with compassion people who are in need, or in the common vision of the church, or making sure that we support those who we need to support. I love how Paul says in verse 8, I'm not commanding you, but I want to test the sincerity of your love by comparing it with the earnesty of others. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he was poor, so that through his poverty might become rich. You might become rich. You see, generosity can't be commanded. That's called tax, isn't it? When it's commanded, if it's required of you, it's not generosity. And Paul says that they need to be moved not by guilt, not by shame. Their motivation is to be love. We are to be motivated in our generosity by our love. First for God, and then when we see how much God loves his people, we are motivated to love the people as well. Because ministry, service for God, is sacrifice. I'm so glad the Medleys are here today, because they've left their jobs, they've left their culture, they've left their people to serve God. And if we need to support them. We need to care for them. I was thinking about the cost of serving here at HBBC. All your ministry leaders are part-time. All your chaplains in schools are part-time. Do you know how hard it is to live on a part-time wage today in Sydney? It's really difficult. So they take on other jobs to supplement their wage. I just want to point out the sacrifice that the ministry leaders and the chaplains give for the service of the church. So it's incumbent upon us to at least make sure we support them and we care for them. But none of them, the Medleys, the ministry leaders, the chaplains, those who serve here, we don't do it because we want to achieve something. We want to do it because we want to live in the love of Jesus. We looked at Jesus' example, the example that Jesus gave of the way he humbled himself. He became human. He became flesh. He enjoyed the delights of heaven, and yet he chose to become human, born into filth. And I don't know if you've had the experience of going from maybe our culture to another culture where there's the cleanliness is different. I don't know, you know, there's filth there. There's everywhere you look, you don't know, should I even put that in my mouth? They're offering me this food. Should I put that in my mouth? I don't know if you've ever been in that situation, but isn't that what Jesus experienced? The hosts of heaven, the delight of God in all his glory, to be born in a manger where cattle feed. That, of course, look like a holiday resort when you compare the cross. The cruelty and the horror of the cross. So Paul says this is our example. Jesus sacrificed himself, so we can sacrifice ourselves. We can care. As I was preparing this, I wrote this sentence. We have every reason to be generous, okay? I've just written that sentence. I was in the lounge room, I think it was Wednesday or Thursday. We have every reason to be generous. During the week, some friends of ours, they're Syrian refugees. They've just come to Australia. Joni gave them a car. I don't know if you remember that, but they've just had twin babies. But there she is, her name's Rama. She's pleading with Wendy and I to put down our name to sponsor a refugee that she knew in Iraq. She knows this woman, she's a widow, and had 2 sons. Now, when you give money to charities for refugees, that's okay, isn't it? Because I can give 1,000, I'll give you maybe 2,000, because there's millions of refugees out there, and it doesn't sort of hit you because what can I do? But what happens when you're given a picture of this woman and her 2 children? Here they are on the screen. I blanked off their faces. So now we've been given a picture of a widow in Iraq who comes from Syria with her 2 sons, and just like same age as those kids in there. And then I write the line, we have every reason to be generous. This is one of the quirks of God. For any pastor who writes a sermon and you think, what do you do? We have every reason to be generous. Well, we have every reason to be generous. I think of what James says, religion that God, our Father, accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress. And here's a woman who's a widow, who is a believer, who is in Iraq right now. Can you imagine the danger of a lone woman in a place like Iraq, who's not even a citizen there, who doesn't have family? We have every reason to be generous, so I tell myself. Well, Paul continues. Let me go to verse 10. Here is my judgment about what is best in the matter. Last year you were first not only to give, but also to have the desire to do so. Now finish the work so that your eager willingness to do it may be matched by your completion of it according to your means. For if the willingness is there, the gift is acceptable according to what one has, not according to what one does not have. Finish what's been started. That's what he says. Finish what you've started. You can't give what you don't have, but what you have, you can give. Jesus said Paul tells us, Jesus said in Acts 20:35, the Lord said, it's more blessed to give than receive. You know why that's the case? Because if you've got something that you can give, how much more blessed are you than the person who doesn't have anything to give? If you can give something, you are blessed because you've got something, but there are people in our world today who have nothing to give. I need to, time's sort of getting on, but let me just get down to, I might go down to verse 16. As I read this, look at how Paul is careful about how he uses money. He says, thanks be to God who put in the heart of Titus the same concern I have for you. For Titus not only welcomed our appeal, but he is coming to you with much enthusiasm and on his own initiative. And we are sending along with him the brother who is praised by all the churches for his service to the gospel. What is more, he is chosen by the churches to accompany us as we carry the offering, which we administer in order to honour the Lord himself and show our eagerness to help. We want to avoid any criticism of the way we administer this liberal gift. We want to avoid any criticism. I want you to know what happens to that money that goes through those bags or through the offering electronically. I want you to know so you're confident that your money is well cared for. The money has been collected here in cash, it's taken out there, and it's counted by 2 people. They put that in a secure safe, which Mark tells me only 4 people have access to. I don't know who those 4 people are, but there's only 4 of you who have access to that safe. Another person, not the original ones, comes and takes that money and puts it in the bank. All the money is reconciled. The money that you put in electronically is reconciled every week. All expenditure is spent according to the budget. If there is something beyond the budget, it has to go to approval to the church leaders. Approval is, reports are generated on a monthly basis. The church leaders get a report every month. We want you to know any money that you give this church is looked after, administered very carefully. It's for the sake of those who handle the money, but also to give you confidence. I'm going to conclude now, but I want to give a few practical thoughts about giving. The Old Testament principle of tithing, setting aside 10% of your income, it's a good principle. It's not a command for us in the New Covenant, but it's a good principle. If you're looking for a guide, 10% of what you earn is a good principle. Whatever you do, if you think you're only 5% or 2% or whatever, let me encourage you. Increase the percentage by 1% every year. That's a great exercise. It's a great thing to do. There are 3 valid biblical reasons for you to use your money. Provide money to support your family. Second one's not popular, you won't like this one. Pay taxes. That's a biblical use of money. And the third thing is to be generous. And generosity may mean that you're going to throw a party for your neighbours, and that's just the generosity. Or it may mean you're going to help a homeless person some way by giving money. That's being generous. Remember the parable of the foolish farmer? He got so much money, he built a big barn, pull his barns down, big barn. He's going to be ripe for many years to come, except God called him a fool and took him that night. Remember the parable of Lazarus, pursuing wealth at its own peril. It's a dangerous thing for us to do. We're not to be in the wealth creation priority. That's not our priority, wealth creation. Jesus tells us that money, or mammon, is the other god. Money is a cruel, terribly cruel God who will demand everything of you. You will have to sacrifice even your family if you worship money. It does not love you at all. It will use you completely. Look for an opportunity to give. One of the things I want to encourage you, you think that's a lot of, I'll give a certain amount of money. Why don't you give a little bit more than you're comfortable giving? It hurts a bit at the time. I'm a bit of a tightwad myself, but when you apprise the money from your own hands so that you give it, it hurts at the time, but it's always good. It's always a good thing. The money God will not be pleased, but you'll have a Father in heaven who gives you a smile. Let me pray. Father, I want to first I want to pray for those here who may be struggling with gambling. Lord, I want to pray you touch their heart